Hey darlings. A single mother sheltered a young widower with a baby one day. She spied through the window and did not believe what the man was capable of doing. On a quiet morning in Paloma's small house, the sun's rays were beginning to illuminate the simple kitchen where Cristino was preparing breakfast. His year-old son was sitting at the table playing with little cars while he waited. "Mom, can I have chocolate in the milk today?" he asked. "Sure, but just a little bit." "Okay," Paloma responded with a smile as she served the chocolate milk. In her son's glass after breakfast, Paloma dedicated herself to organizing the house in the afternoon while Cristino did his homework. Paloma sat down with her crochet material, and when night came while Cristino was sleeping, Paloma was reflecting on the day despite the difficulties. She was grateful to work in the store and crochet at night. It wasn't easy, but it allowed her to take care of her son and keep a roof over their heads. "We are together, and that's what matters," she thought, looking into the small room where Cristino slept peacefully. That was his weekend routine. When he worried more about his house, his son, and his crochet sales during the week, the routine was a whirlwind of activities from dawn to dusk. Cristino spent the day at school absorbing the news with the curiosity and enthusiasm typical of her age. The work as a salesperson was not easy. The hours were long, and the customers were not always patient, but every smile, every gesture of gratitude made Paloma feel that somehow it was making a difference. That was Paloma's life. Days filled with the routine of motherhood, work, and moments dedicated to crochet. Despite the struggles and uncertainties, there was an unbreakable strength in her heart, fueled by the love for Cristino and the hope of days better. However, to reach her current state of stability, she had to go through several difficulties. The lowest point of her life occurred because of a man with whom Mauricio had fallen in love. Mauricio, Paloma's ex-husband, was a man who had proven to be very different from what she imagined when they fell in love during their courtship. He was charming and attentive, a true gentleman who promised a future of love and security. But after marriage, the mask fell, revealing a rude, lazy, and sometimes violent man. The transformation was gradual, first with harsh words, then with irrational demands, and eventually with threats that left deep emotional scars on Paloma. She remembered the nights of fear, lying down deserted, thinking about the future. "This is not life," I thought, "and it is not what I want for my son." Pregnancy, although initially a source of joy, it became a point of insecurity. The fear that Mauricio could do some harm to his unborn child was the impetus for a decision that would change her life forever. The escape was carefully planned but executed with a heavy heart. Paloma knew that by taking that step she would be closing a chapter of her life and opening another full of uncertainties. On a particularly tense night when Mauricio went out with friends, promising to return late, Paloma saw her opportunity. With tears in her eyes, but determined, she packed the essentials. Some clothes, important documents, and the little money she had managed to save. She took one last look at the house she could no longer call home, took a deep breath, and left, taking with her not only her belongings but the hope of a safe life for her son. She chose the darkness of the night for her departure, taking advantage of the stillness to cover her escape. The road was lonely and terrifying. Every shadow and every noise made her heart race. But the image of her safe and happy son guided her steps, giving her strength to continue. Paloma did not have a clear destination, only the desire for distance between her and the man who promised her love but brought only pain. In the days and weeks that followed, Paloma faced many challenges: the difficulty of finding a safe place to stay, the search for work to support herself and her son, and the constant fear that Mauricio would find them. But with each obstacle overcome, he felt stronger, more capable. And when he looked at Cristino, now aged, he saw living proof that his decision, no matter how difficult it may have been, was the right one. The escape marked the beginning of a new life for Paloma and Cristino, a life built with love, resilience, and the determination to never look back. However, this routine of stability was about to be interrupted. One night, Paloma's house was full of laughter and toys scattered around the living room. Cristino, with his inexhaustible energy, ran from one place to another inventing stories for his plastic superheroes. "Mom, I'm hungry. This fight used up all my energy," he announced, interrupting an epic battle in the middle of the living room. Paloma smiled, her attention diverted from the dishes she was washing in the kitchen to attend to his son's request. "I'm going to prepare something delicious for you now. You can leave it," he responded. But it was then when he remembered the garbage accumulated in the kitchen. "Cristino plays, just a little more. Mom is coming back to make your food," he said, taking the garbage bag as she left the house. The coolness of the night enveloped her, a welcome contrast to the heat of the kitchen. The calm of the night was a familiar comfort, but something unexpected caught her attention. From the other side of the sidewalk, under the faint glow on a light post, stood a young man with a baby in his arms. He seemed lost. His eyes swept the environment with a mixture of confusion and desperation. Paloma had never seen him before. He certainly wasn't from the neighborhood. The sight of the baby was so small, and she squeezed her hesitating heart, but moved. Out of an impulse of solidarity, Paloma approached. "Hello, young man. Excuse me, is everything okay?" her soft voice asked, trying to convey comfort. The young man looked at her, surprised, as if he were alone. Now he realized that he was not alone. "Oh yes, not really. I'm lost, and my little brother is hungry," admitted, her voice full of tiredness and concern. Paloma looked at the baby. Despite the circumstances, he was sleeping peacefully. "Come, I can help. You can tell me what happened. But first, let's take care of this little one," she said, leading the way back to her house. The confidence that she exuded despite her own struggles was a calming force within the house. Paloma prepared a bottle for the baby and a snack for the young man, and for Cristino while Elian ate. Paloma sat at the table with him, creating an atmosphere of calm and security. "What are your names?" And the baby began wanting to know more about the young man he had brought home. "My name is Elian," he responded, pausing to look at his little brother asleep in the corner of the sofa. "And this is my little brother Hugo. Now we are only U.S." Paloma tilted her head, encouraging him to continue. "What happened to them? It seems like they were on the street for a long time." The question was simple, but loaded with a weight that Elian felt on his shoulders. "For a long time," Elian sighed, a heavy sound for someone so young. "My mother. He got married again a few years ago. At first he seemed like a good man, but I always had a bad feeling about him, and I was right." Elian stared at the plate in front of him, as if the painful memories were too much to bear. Confront. "After they got married, he changed, or maybe he just showed who he really was. He became violent, always yelling and threatening my mother and me." Elian's voice shook slightly, but he continued the need to share his story, overcoming the fear. "When my mother became pregnant with Hugo, I thought things could get better, but they only got worse. He didn't want another child, and after Hugo was born, things became unbearable. I had to do something. I couldn't let Hugo grow up in that environment and be affected by it. As I was, there was a determination in his eyes, a strength that came from the need to protect his brother at any cost. So one night while my mother and he were fighting, I took Hugo and ran away." Paloma listened with a heavy heart to Elian's story, echoing painfully with her own. She knew well the fear and bravery that comes with making the decision to flee to protect someone you love. "You did the right thing, Elian. Hugo, she is lucky to have a brother like you. I went through something similar, and I understand your difficulty." Elian looked at Paloma, finding in her eyes not only understanding but also a silent promise of help. "I just want him to have a better opportunity than the one I had," he muttered almost to himself. "He will," Paloma stated with a conviction that she herself felt herself getting stronger. "I will help as much as I can. I don't have much, but I have enough to be able to help." At that moment, an invisible bond was formed between them, united by shared experiences and by the determination to build a future better for the children in his care. Elian, still digesting Paloma's generosity, couldn't help but express his gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you. You are doing more for us than anyone has done in a long time," he said, sincerity shining in his eyes. It was at that moment of shared vulnerability where a friendship began to blossom. Talking about their experiences not only brought them closer, but also offered a glimpse of hope to Elian, who until then had felt alone in his struggle. "I am determined to find a job to build a life for us here," Elian shared, reflecting on his next step now that he had found a safe place for them, Paloma, his own needs, and the offer he could make. He saw an opportunity for both of us, could use some help around here. He cautiously suggested, "You could help me with the cleaning and take care of Cristino while I'm at work. I can't offer much, but I could help you with something until you find a better job." Elian quickly accepted. "I accept. It will be an honor to help. And also a way to thank you for everything you are doing for others." The gratitude in his voice was palpable, and the job offer was not only an opportunity for him to support his brother, but also a chance to repay Paloma's kindness in this way. So with his new caregiver, Cristino began attending school only in the morning period, allowing Paloma to save on the full monthly payment, and at the same time giving Elian the opportunity to work and contribute to the house. With Elle's constant presence brought a new dynamic to the family routine, with him taking on the responsibility of keeping the house in order, taking care of meals, and the biggest challenge of all, managing Cristino's endless energy and Hugo's needs. Elian struggled to maintain a positive attitude in the face of household chores and childcare. Washing clothes, sweeping the floor, and ensuring that the dishes were always clean became essential parts of her daily life. In addition, she prepared lunch and took care of Cristino after he went to school and made sure that Hugo was well fed and comfortable. Although he found joy in the children's smiles and laughter, he could not deny the tiredness he felt at the end of the day. Cristino, with his 6 years of pure energy, did not make Elian's work any easier. Boy, he had a strong personality and a tendency towards stubbornness that often tested the patience of his new guardian. Elian, although he strove to be a good role model and caregiver, sometimes struggled to maintain order and calm. Elian constantly tried to impose limits, but Cristino frequently broke things, made things dirty and messy, and when Paloma came home, he not only scolded Cristino, but also Elian on all occasions. Paloma scolded him for the lack of care and responsibility, and he tried to apologize. "Paloma, I'm so sorry. I really don't know how this happened," Elian began, his voice full of remorse, trying to explain the situation by describing how Cristino had experimented with painting without his permission while he was busy taking care of Hugo. 7. With every word, I hoped Paloma would understand that it had been an accident, a moment of carelessness that anyone could have. Paloma listened, but her frustration didn't subside. "I trusted you to take care of the house and Cristino. I know he can be challenging, but I hoped you could handle it," she said, tiredness and disappointment weighing on every word. Although he understood the challenges of caring for 2 children, the sight of his ruined living room was too much to ignore. Elian accepted the reprimand, knowing that he was somehow responsible. He felt the weight of the trust that Paloma had placed in him, and since somehow he had failed, "I promise that this will not be repeated. I will be more attentive, and I will ensure that Cristino understands the rules of the house," he promised, determined not to let a mistake ruin the trust that had been built between. Paloma, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, sighed deeply, allowing the initial anger to give way to understanding. She knew that accidents happen, and that Elian was doing the best he could in a challenging situation. "Okay, we will clean this up together, and we will think about how to make Cristino understand the seriousness of his act." He finally agreed to calm down completely, and therefore there was a particularly difficult day. That afternoon, the house seemed like a battlefield for Elian, who was struggling to keep everything under control. Hugo, the baby, had chosen just that day to test his brother's patience with a shrill cry. Elian, trying to remain calm, deduced that hunger was the cause of the little one's discomfort, and he started to heat the milk. While the milk was heating, Elian ran between the kitchen and the patio, watching the clothes on the clothesline. The sky darkened, foreshadowing the rain that would soon fall, and he knew that he needed to act quickly to save the clothes from being wet. It was a constant juggle to divide his attention between housework and taking care of the children. Cristino, oblivious to the tension that was floating in the air, found in that tumultuous moment the perfect opportunity to turn the living room into an improvised soccer field, the ball thrown with more force than expected. Necessary, he found his target not in the wall, but in the lamp that crashed upon impact, scattering pieces of glass on the floor. The roar immediately captured Elian's attention, who, overcome with a mixture of concern and frustration, ran towards the living room. "Cristino, are you okay?" examined him. To the child for cuts or wounds, relieved to find the child unharmed. However, concern quickly gave way to irritation. "How many times have I said not to play with the ball inside the house? Look what you did." The reprimand was interrupted by the sudden reminder of the milk on the stove. "The milk, my God!" Elian exclaimed, running back to the kitchen, fearing the worst. Luckily, he arrived in time to avoid a bigger disaster. By putting out the fire before the milk spilled, taking a deep breath, he tried to regain control of the situation, his mind turning to find a solution to the chaos established. Cristino, realizing the seriousness of his mistake, lowered his head, guilty. He knew the rules, but the temptation to turn the room into a play space had been too strong to resist. "I'm sorry," Eli murmured, his small, regretful voice. Elian, returning to the living room after making sure the stove was off and the milk was safe, he found himself before an embarrassed Cristino and a Hugo still crying. The weight of the responsibility, added to the exhaustion and stress of the moment, pressed on his shoulders. However, he knew he needed to stay calm. It was the adult there who was responsible. "Let's clean up this mess," he said, more to himself than to Cristino, "and next time, remember, not inside the house." Elian carefully began to pick up the pieces of glass scattered on the living room floor. Each movement was careful, avoiding cuts and ensuring that no fragments were left behind, a danger to Cristino's bare feet. The broken lamp was not just a physical disorder, but also a symbol of the chaos that seemed to have set in that day. As he concentrated on cleaning up, the sound of lightning cut the silence, followed by the immediate pounding of rain against the windows. Elian's heart sank. The clothes, in one quick movement, he threw the pieces of glass in the trash and ran outside, hoping to save the clothes hanging on the clothesline before the rain soaked them completely. The rain fell fiercely, every drop as a reminder of the skills that Elian carried. Fighting against the wind and water, he began to tear the clothes off the clothesline, his hands trembling not only from the cold, but also from the tension accumulated with the clothes. Finally, in his arms, he returned to the inside, soaked and exhausted, but relieved to have managed to recover it before it was too late. Back in the kitchen, the weight of the day finally caught up with him. Sitting at the table, Elian allowed himself to cry, the tears mixing with the rain water that was still running through his hair and clothes. The crying was silent but charged with emotion, a release of the pressure and stress that had accumulated. It was in that moment of vulnerability that Cristino found him. The boy, seeing Elian in that state, felt the impulse to help, to do something to ease the pain of the one who had become an older brother, a protector. "Eli, are you okay? You look so sad. Is it because of me?" he asked, his small voice full of concern and care. Elian looked at Cristino, surprised by the interruption of his words. Tumultuous thoughts. The sight of the child, so worried and sincere, made him feel even more emotional. "I'm just a little tired," Cristino tried to explain. Forcing a smile through his tears, Cristino, without hesitation, approached and offered a hug, a gesture. Simple support and affection. "Everything is going to be okay, Eli, I'll help you," Cristino said firmly. That moment of unexpected comfort was a turning point for Elian. He realized that despite the overwhelming responsibility, Cristino's strength and compassion were not alone. Even if he was just a child, they were a reminder that kindness and support can come from the most unlikely sources. Wiping away tears, Elian hugged Cristino back, to grateful for having found a family in the midst of the chaos of his life. the brief peace. Found in Cristino's comforting embrace, she was suddenly interrupted by the sound of the front door opening. Paloma entered, the expression of relief for finally being home quickly giving way to irritation as she noticed the empty space where the living room lamp previously hung. The incident of the broken lamp, although clean, it left a visible mark on the order of the house, a mute testimony to the tensions of the day. Elian, still sitting at the kitchen table, trying to compose himself from his own emotions, was surprised by the rapid change of atmosphere. The tears in her eyes had not yet dried when Paloma, with a voice full of frustration, demanded an explanation. What happened to the living room lamp? Her irritation was evident, every word like an additional weight on Elian's overloaded shoulders, fighting against the tide of emotions that threatened to hit him again. He found himself speechless, the guilt over the broken lamp, the pressure of taking care of the children in the house, and now the disappointment in Paloma's eyes, everything mixed together. Leaving him unable to formulate a coherent response, he opened his mouth to try to explain, but all he managed was a sob, a silent confession of his sense of failure. Then when Cristino, perceiving Elian's suffering, took a step forward with a surprising maturity for his age, he assumed the responsibility. Was me. Mom was playing with the ball inside the house and I accidentally broke the lamp, she admitted, looking bravely at Paloma. Elian tried to tell me not to do it, but I didn't listen. It's not her fault. Paloma. Listening to his son's words, he felt the initial irritation give way to a reluctant compliance. He observed the interaction between Elian and Cristino, the passionate defense of the younger one by the older one, and realized the depth of the bond that had formed between them. I'm sorry. Elian didn't want to stress you out like that. Finally, he said, the severity in his voice softening it, valuing understanding and communication within the Paloma family, seeing the effort Elian had made during the day despite the challenges, and Cristino's bravery in assuming the blame, felt a mixture of gratitude and pride. Let's have dinner together, he suggested, wanting to repair the atmosphere of the home, and tomorrow we will all choose a new lamp for the living room. That night, while they were sharing the meal, the family found Flor in the company. From the other, a silent promise of mutual support no matter what storms they might face, and for Elian, Cristino's gesture in his defense was a beacon of hope, a reminder that he really had someone to turn to. Since the incident of the lamp, a new dynamic began to form in Paloma's house. Recognizing the burden that Elian carried on his shoulders, he made the conscious decision to be more patient and offer Ori instead of just expectations. This subtle but significant change paved the way for a deeper and significant between them. Paloma not only helped Elian perfect his domestic skills, but also created an environment where he felt safe and valued. Over time, this closeness allowed them to get to know each other better, building a friendship that went beyond mere coexistence. Paloma, with her new, more attentive approach, began to notice patterns in Elian's behavior that had previously gone unnoticed. She observed his silences, his distant looks, and the small sighs that suggested a heavy emotional burden. It was on a quiet afternoon when he noticed Elian was particularly anxious that Paloma decided to intervene. She found him in the patio looking into nothing, clearly lost in worrying thoughts. Elian, is everything okay? She asked, her voice full of genuine concern. Elian, surprised at having been discovered in a moment of vulnerability, he hesitated before responding at first. Elian tried to hide his anxiety with a forced smile, but Paloma's affectionate insistence encouraged him to open up. He's my stepfather, he began, his voice trembling slightly. He's been sending messages for the last few years. Days I'm afraid I don't know what to do, and I don't want to see him again, he confessed, revealing the reason for his anxiety. Elian feared the possibility that his father would find him and Hugo bringing back the ghosts of the past that she struggled so hard to forget. Paloma listened attentively, her heart clenched with every word Elian said. She knew well the fear that domestic violence could instill in its victims, having fled an abusive past herself. "Elian, you are not alone in this," she said, firmly holding his hands in his. "We are going to face this together in the same way we have faced everything until now." Elian, absorbing Paloma's words, felt a mixture of relief and uncertainty. But what if I answer and that encourages him to continue searching, and if he discovers where we are? Concern was evident in his voice, his eyes searching Paloma's for some certainty that could calm her turbulent heart. Paloma, meditating carefully before answering, she chose her words with a mixture of firmness and compassion. "Elian understands your fear. I really understand, but completely ignoring it may not be the solution. You could try more extreme methods of getting in touch." Respond. Setting clear boundaries can be a way to keep some control over the situation. "And what about the address?" Elon asked. The thought of any information that could lead his father to them filled him with a paralyzing fear. "Never give our address or any information that could compromise your safety or that of Hugo." "Yes. If you decide to respond, be vague about your current situation and firm about not wanting contact. It is important to make it clear that you are fine, but you prefer to keep your distance," Paloma advised, conveying not only guidance but also a promise of support no matter what happens. Was inspired by Paloma's bravery and wisdom, Elian felt a glimpse of hope. Night fell on the house, bringing with it a calm that he had not felt in a long time. He wrote a response, each word loaded with the weight of years of silence and fear, but also with the strength he had found in his new family. "I am fine, but I prefer to keep my life private. Please respect my desire for distance." Sending the message was an act of bravery, a step towards reaffirmation of his autonomy and security. In the following days, Elian looked at his phone with a mixture of anxiety and resolution. The initial tension gave way to a cautious calm, while life in Paloma's house resumed its normal course. Paloma, observing Elian with an attentive gaze and protective, she felt more determined than ever to protect the precious family they had formed against any storm that might arise. However, the temporary peace that Elian had found was interrupted by the sound of a new message reaching her cell phone. This time it was not a text but an audio. With her heart in her mouth, she listened to it, and her mother's very tearful voice filled the silence of the room. She cried, her voice broken by desperation, imploring for any sign of her whereabouts. "Elian, please, my son alone. I need to know that you are okay. Tell me where you are, please," he sobbed in the audio, his words like stabs in Elian's heart. Elian's reaction was immediate. The cell phone slipped from his trembling hands, and he felt the ground. His mother's voice disappeared under his feet, so full of pain and fear. It revived in his chest, a mixture of emotions that he thought he had left behind for a moment. He saw himself again as that scared child, desperate to protect his little brother from any evil. Taken by an overwhelming urgency, Elian looked for Paloma, the only person he knew who could help in that whirlwind of feelings. When he found her in the kitchen, her eyes were pale, red, not only from the recent emotional discharge but also out of fear of what that message could mean. Paloma began with a trembling voice. "It's my mother who sent a message. She's crying. She wants to know where we are." Paloma, upon noticing Elian's condition, immediately put aside what she was doing to give her full attention to him. Listening to the audio, his heart tightened because of the pain evident in Elian's mother's voice. He knew that this moment would require more than words from Consuelo. He needed action, guidance. Elian said, choosing each word carefully, "This is very difficult, I know, but we have to think calmly about how to respond. Your mother is clearly worried and suffering. Ignoring this, it would only bring more pain to both of them." The serenity in La Voz de Paloma offered a necessary counterpoint to the emotional storm that Elian was facing. After a long conversation, they decided together that Elian would respond, but cautiously record an audio reassuring his mother that he was safe and fine, but without revealing his exact location or details about his new life. It was a delicate balance between calming his mother's heart without jeopardizing the security they had achieved with so much effort. Elian with Paloma at his side offering silent support, recorded the message for his mother. The task was distressing, each carefully measured word, but when he finished he felt a weight lift slightly. From his shoulders said his voice full of emotion, but firm. Mom, I received your message. First, I want you to know that I am fine. Hugo is also fine. We are safe. I know you must be very worried, and I am very sorry for everything. The suffering we caused by disappearing like this, but it had to be done for our safety. It was a difficult decision, believe me, and it was not taken lightly. I cannot say where we are. No, it is not yet safe, and I need to ensure that Hugo and I can continue living without fear. I hope that one day we can meet and explain everything, but for now I need you to respect our decision to keep distance. I want you to know that I always think of you, and despite everything, I miss you. Please take care of yourself. I will try to maintain some kind of contact, even if it is alone. To know that we are okay. I love you, Mom. Elian looked at the cell phone with a mixture of hope and nervousness, wanting more than anything an answer that would calm the tumult in his heart. When the device vibrated, indicating the arrival of a new message, his heart jumped. He pressed the button to listen, waiting for his mother's voice, perhaps with words of understanding, or even from Consuelo. Instead, what he heard was his father's voice, harsh and threatening, a sound he hoped to never hear again. If you don't tell us where you are, you have no idea what I am capable of doing to your mother, the father threatened in a tone that chilled Elian's blood. The words were like stabs, each one carrying the weight of past threats made true. Elian felt the fear take root deeply, paralyzed. The young man felt it spring up, tears, his mind running in search of solutions while despair suffocated him. How could he protect his mother from a distance, and Hugo, who barely knew the world, but already had to hide from it? The feeling of helplessness oppressed him, a knot forming in his throat, preventing any words from escaping. It was Paloma who found Elian in this despair, the cell phone still in his trembling hand. Upon hearing the audio, his face hardened, a mixture of anger and determination taking shape. Elian, you are not alone in this, he said, his voice firm, cutting the heavy silence that had formed between them. We are going to think together about a solution. We are not going to let him continue controlling their lives through fear. Despite the attempts to calm young Elian in a moment of panic, absolute concern for his mother's safety overcame his own instinct for self-preservation. Without thinking about the long-term consequences, he quickly recorded a new audio, this time revealing the address where they were hiding. The trembling voice quickly said before sending the message, driven by a desire desperate to protect his mother at any cost. As soon as the audio was sent, an immediate feeling of regret invaded Paloma as she understood the gravity of what Elian had just done. Du felt a wave of worry overwhelm his being. Elian, that was a bad idea, he said. The look of desperation on Elian's face confirmed his fear. He had given in to the pressure, putting not only his safety at risk, but also Hugo's and hers. The silence that followed was filled with tension. Paloma knew they needed to act quickly. We need to prepare. I will contact some trusted people. We can find a safe place to stay for a while, she said, her voice full of determination. The fear had subsided, transformed into action. It was time to protect his family at all costs. Elian, although still stunned by fear and guilt, he knew that Paloma was right. The mistake made in a moment of panic could not be undone, but there was still time to minimize the damage. United by a sense of urgency, they began to plan their next steps, ready to face the consequences of their decision and fight for the safety and well-being of their makeshift family. They ran through the house, collecting clothes, important documents, and anything else they might need in the coming days. The plan was simple: to find temporary shelter in a hotel far enough away to ensure their safety, while Paloma thought about someone she trusted who could shelter them for a while. Elian, still shaken by the recent threat and its response impulsive, she moved mechanically, following Paloma's instructions. Hugo, sensing the tension in the air, began to whimper, capturing the fear and urgency that dominated the atmosphere. Elian. She took him into her arms, trying to calm her brother with soft words, while she continued to fill her backpack with the few possessions she considered essential. Meanwhile, Paloma went to the kitchen to prepare some quick snacks, something they could eat during the escape. While she put the sandwiches in a thermal bag, his gaze involuntarily shifted towards the window, a common habit in search of a brief moment of peace, looking towards the patio where Cristino used to play. That's when his heart stopped. Out there approaching the house with a determined step was Mauricio, her ex-husband. The sight of him so unexpectedly made Paloma's blood run high for a moment. She was completely paralyzed, unable to process the reality of the threat that was now knocking on her door. Quickly recovering, the control ran back to the living room where Elian and the children were finishing the suitcases. "Mauricio, my ex-husband is here," the voice full of panic whispered. "We need to leave now through the back door," the fear in his eyes enough to convey the urgency of the situation. There was no time for doubts or hesitation. The revelation made by Paloma in a moment, already full of tension and fear, fell like a bomb among them. "My father's name is also Mauricio," Elian said, the confusion evident in his voice. The silence that followed was dense, each one processing the coincidence as they quickly realized the terrible truth behind that unexpected connection. Paloma stopped in her tracks. She turned to look at Elian, her eyes wide open at the sight. Surprise and sudden understanding the coincidence of names in such a vast world suddenly had a terrifying meaning. "Your stepfather Mauricio is the same Mauricio?" my ex-husband asked, his voice trembling not so much because of the doubt, but because of the implication of what that meant. Elian Al, connecting the dots, felt like the ground was opening beneath his feet. The realization that the man who had been a source of fear and anguish in his life was the same one who had caused Paloma and Cristino so much pain. It filled him with a feeling of horror. "I swear to God, I had no idea about this," he managed to say the words, the bitter irony of this discovery barely coming out between trembling lips. "Leave aside for now the implications of this shocking discovery. We have to go now," Paloma insisted, determined to protect her newfound family by strengthening her voice. She knew they would have to face the consequences of this discovery later. The important thing at that moment was to ensure everyone's safety. Elian, although shocked, nodded his head in agreement. The complexity of their relationships, now intertwined in such an unexpected and painful way, would have to be untangled at another time, with Hugo still in his arms. Paloma, Cristino at his side as they moved quickly towards the back exit. The tension was palpable in the air as Paloma, Elian, and the children moved silently through the backyard, trying to remain unnoticed in the darkness of the night. The sound of Mauricio's voice calling Elian with fury echoed behind them, each call increasing the fear and the haste of their escape. "Elian, Elian, where are you? I know you are there," his voice shouted, echoing in a terrifying way. They had almost reached the safety of the shadows beyond the patio when the unexpected happened. Hugo, feeling the tension in Elian's arms, he began to cry, and his noise attracted the attention of Mauricio, who was guided directly towards them. The sound of the baby crying, it was enough to stop him. Attract the attention of Mauricio, who quickly surrounded the house following the origin of the sound. When Mauricio finally spotted them, the shock was mutual. Paloma and Elian stopped abruptly, as if they had been frozen in time. The surprise on Mauricio's face was evident. He did not expect to find to his ex-wife, much less in the company of Elian and the children. "What?" Paloma exclaimed, almost incredulous when he saw his ex-wife, the shock momentarily softening his fury. "Mauricio," began Paloma, his trembling voice marked. Out of surprise and fear, she held Cristino's hand tightly, an instinctive attempt to protect her son from any harm that could come. "Mauricio, please don't do anything you might regret," she said, trying to keep her voice firm. Mauricio, for his part, he seemed equally stunned, his gaze oscillating between Paloma and Elian, trying to assimilate the scene before him. "Paloma, what are you doing here and with Elian?" The initial anger gave way to confusion, his original intentions crumbling before the encounter. Unexpected, the The small and interconnected world in which they found themselves at that moment seemed surreal, each one facing the surprise and implications of that forced meeting. Paloma, holding Cristino's hand tighter and staying between Mauricio and the children, responded, "It's not what you think. We're trying to protect the children. Mauricio, please for them, calm down, and we can talk about this." However, Mauricio's brief excitement quickly gave way to renewed fury. "You abandoned me, Paloma. You took my son and disappeared," she shouted, anger making her voice tremble. Each word was impregnated with accusation, and she took a step forward, her imposing presence more threatening than ever. Paloma, despite the fear that consumed her inside, stood firm. "Mauricio, I had no choice. I needed to protect Cristino and myself," answered his voice, carrying a trace of supplication. "Please think about the children. We do not want anything bad to happen to them." While the tension between Paloma and Mauricio escalated, Elian, acting with forced calm, discreetly took out the cell out of his pocket. With his eyes fixed on the scene before him, he dialed the police number, his hand shaking slightly, pressing the call button. He kept the phone hidden, hoping that somehow his action could bring the help they desperately needed. On the other side of the line, the silence was broken only by the raised voices and tension transmitted through the audio. He said nothing. He just left the phone on, allowing the officers to hear the veiled threats and argument heated between Paloma and Mauricio. The hope that the police could trace the call and arrive in time was all that Mauricio had. Oblivious to Elian's silent action, he continued arguing, his voice getting louder and louder. "You ruined everything, Paloma. How could you do this to me, and now too? You are hiding Elian from me." He seemed to know no limits, and every word increased the danger of the situation. Paloma, desperately trying to calm the situation, responded, "I'm just trying to do what's best for the children, Mauricio. Please, let's resolve this peacefully." His attempt at negotiation, however, seemed to have little effect on Mauricio's fury. Meanwhile, Elon remained motionless, the phone still in his hand, the call open, observing the worst but hopeful that his decision to call the police would be correct enough to ensure the safety of all of them. With each passing second, the urgency of their situation became clearer, and the hope of intervention before the situation escalated to a point of no return kept everyone in suspense. Agonizing alertness as the tension escalated. Mauricio's anger boiled to the surface, exploding in an explosion of screams that tore through the calm of the night. "You abandoned me, Paloma. You took my son and disappeared. You are going to pay for this. You are going to pay dearly for having abandoned me," he shouted, his unleashed fury making his veins jump in his neck. The accusation was unjust, distorted by the perception of his own pain and rage, ignoring the true reasons that had led Paloma to flee. Paloma faced the storm of Mauricio's accusations. He tried desperately to remain calm, although tears of fear began to run down his face. "Mauricio, please think about the children," his voice trembling with terror, implored. "We cannot solve this like this, not in front of them." His plea was for mercy as much as for reason, an attempt to protect not only herself but also Elian, Hugo, and Cristino from the trauma of witnessing such violence. The neighbors, alarmed by the screams coming from the house, began to come out to see what was happening, his attention adding pressure to the already tense situation. Paloma's desperation was palpable, her pleas becoming more urgent as Mauricio became increasingly uncontrollable, refusing to listen to reason or compassion. It was at that critical moment that the sound of sirens tore the night apart. Mix of relief and anxiety, the police arrived quickly, their steps firm and determined. As they approached the chaotic scene, they found Mauricio in a state of blind fury, Paloma in tears, and the children terrified. Without hesitation, the officers acted, arresting Mauricio while he screamed, resisting with desperate rage the reality of his imminent arrest. The police intervention brought an abrupt end to the confrontation. Although the house still resonated with the emotional residue of what had happened, Mauricio was handcuffed and took to the patrol, his protests and threats diminishing as he walked away. Paloma, hugging her children, and Elian allowed herself to cry openly, now the tears flowing not only from fear, but also of relief. Elian, although shocked, he felt a wave of gratitude for the timely arrival of the police, knowing that for now they were safe. The night had been a whirlwind of emotions, but in the end solidarity and courage prevailed, bringing a glimpse of peace afterwards of the storm that day. Under the dark sky and the flashing lights of the police patrols, a new page began to be written in the history of two families who, against all odds, had been intertwined by destiny. And the pain, Mauricio's arrest marked the end of a long period of fear, uncertainty, and suffering for all of them. The evidence collected, including the threatening messages and the audio sent to Elian, were crucial to ensure that justice was done. Mauricio finally faced the consequences of his acts were carried out by the police, their fury and lack of control contrasting with the palpable relief that enveloped everyone else. With the threat that Mauricio represented was now contained Paloma, Elian, Cristino, and Hugo. For the first time in a long time, they could breathe a sigh of relief. The moment of terror had ended up giving way to a dawn of hope and renewal. Dove, with tears in her eyes, but with a shy smile on her face, she hugged her children and Elian, grateful for the security that they finally had. Enjoy Elian. Despite the joy of seeing the end of Mauricio's reign of terror, he made the difficult decision to return to his mother's side. He knew that the challenges were not over, but he was determined to rebuild his life at her side, offering the support and care she needed to overcome the years of fear and abuse. Her farewell to Paloma and Cristino was filled with emotion, a mix of gratitude and sadness, marking the end of one chapter of their lives and the beginning of another. But still they maintained constant contact with each other and formed a beautiful family. Although their coexistence was not so constant, Paloma now, with the tranquility she longed for, spent the following days dedicating herself entirely to raising Cristino in a safe and secure home. Loving the shadow of had been dissipated, leaving room only for light and joy. I knew that the road ahead would still have its challenges, but I was confident that with love and determination they could face anything. The story of Paloma, Elian, Cristino, and Hugo is a reminder powerful that even in the darkest circumstances the strength of the human spirit and love can prevail. Emerged from this trial stronger, united by bonds that the end adversity could not break. While they continued forward, each one in their own way, they carried with them the certainty that peace had finally been restored in their lives. If you love this narrative, I invite you to show your pleasure by leaving a like and becoming part of our community by subscribing. Your support is the motivation that encourages us to continue presenting wonderful stories almost every day. Stay with us so as not to miss the next exceptional story that will come to your screen. We greatly value your support. See you soon.